very good evening to all of you. Good to see the turnout. Very interesting topic, I should say, and an equally good speaker. We have amongst us today who's going to share his thoughts and experiences with us, Mr. Gaurav Gupta. He's a chartered accountant, an advocate based out of Delhi, and more importantly, a great friend. Uh, we've done quite a few things together, I should say that, including certain matters concerning the ICI. So yes, he's been in practice for more than 2 decades, and he's a what do you say? This was meant. I knew only one part of it, that he's addressing us today. I didn't know till we started this discussion that he has got one more starting at 6 as soon as we end. And just 2 minutes before, he said he finished one and then getting into this. So, sir, thank you so much in that busy part of it also. Thank you for readily accepting to share your thoughts and experiences. As all of you are aware, this is a series we are running on, the audits or assessments or proceedings by the tax office in any form or fashion that are initiated. So we have already done three. This is the fourth one where we are going to hear out from Mr. Gaurav Gupta in terms of what are the issues he believes are coming out as part of these assessments and proceedings, etc., and how each one of us should equip ourselves to kind of get ready from a documentation perspective, from a legal perspective, from a submissions or maybe a procedure, all in all that way. So let me not take more time. Directly requesting Mr. Gaurav Gupta to take from here, and maybe I'll collate all the questions and start posing it towards the end. Sir, over to you. And a very big thank you to be discussing and spending your time with our members today.
Thank you, Badriji. It is always a pleasure. It becomes more special when you are inviting me for some session.
Thank you
A
so much.
very good evening to respected Badrinath ji, respected Yogesh ji, Satish ji, other learned members of BCIC. A very good evening to all of you. Friends, as Badriji has just said, this particular topic, the issues, the debates with the tax officers, it has got no dearth. There is no end. For the very simple reason, the entire debate is about more collection and saving an SSC from the unwanted or unwarranted taxes. I'll share my screen to start the topic. I think if you can allow me to share my screen.
Yes, sir. You already have that. You can.
Can you see, sir?
Yes, we can.
Right, sir. So, starting the topic, I will be quickly presenting the provisions of GST audit in CGST Act, the approach of the departmental GST audit. We will be discussing some of the important issues, and then at the end of the session, we'll be taking up the questions for the session. Friends, the first thing which we always have to understand is what is the audit power the officers have, what is the scope they can cover. Can they call for anything and everything under the sun? If not, what are our rights? What we can stop, what we cannot? And last but not the least, what is the process of GST audit? Section 65, the enabling section for GST audit from the departmental perspective, it says the commissioner or the officer authorized by him will, by an order, may undertake the audit of a registered person. So that's a first point which we all have to keep in mind, that it is only a registered person who can be audited. Now, why am I pressing so, on this particular point? In one of the cases, there was one unit of our SSC, of our client, which was not registered and which was in the supply of exempt goods. Now, the department was wanting to undertake the audit of that particular unit. By this particular provision alone, we had put a very strong, I would say, stand before the authorities that you can undertake any kind of check. You may conduct an anti-evasion enforcement also, but you cannot undertake an audit, because an audit can only be undertaken for a registered person. And registered person will include one of the registered establishments. So if you have deliberately not got yourself registered, now I'm dividing this in between two parts. One is a deliberate unregistered unit. One is a unit which is under the registration of a particular GSTN, but the assessee has missed to update in his GST registration certificate. So you have to be very clear about the two scenarios. We are talking about a unit where you have deliberately not taken a registration because you are not liable under 23, 24, or you have not crossed, the requirement under mandatory requirement under 24 of the CGST Act. Second, the officer may conduct the audit at the place of the registered person or in their own office. Now, that is a choice which has been given to the officer, where we cannot press on either side. Sir, please come to our business location. Neither can you press, no, sir, I'll do one thing, I'll come to your office. I don't think that we will get any respite from any court on this particular issue where the audit has to be conducted. It is the choice of the officer as per the law. Third, the registered person shall be informed not less than 15 working days prior to the conduct of the audit. Now, we all understand that 15 working days is also not enough for preparation in many of the cases. In the normal circumstances, as we have seen, the department usually gives an extension of 1.5 months, and in some of the cases, even up to 3 months. But will that mean that this can be extended, in an unlimited manner? No, not for two reasons. Number one, the department has got its own timelines in terms of closing the matters for a particular financial year. So, for example, most of the officers right now are working on 17, 18, and 18, 19 anti-invasion enforcement proceedings up to 31st of March. Now, that is something where they have been given some timeline by their superior authorities. But that is all, as a matter of discipline, as a matter of statute. The timelines which is given to the officer is by virtue of section 73 and 74, which provides that an officer can raise a demand. I'm not going into 73, 74 per se, I'm directly hitting the limitation time. It is up to 3 years in normal circumstances where the cases are not pertaining to misrepresentation, fraud. And in case it is falling in such particular categories, the timelines will be 5 years from the due date of filing of annual return. Now, in normal cases, when we are talking about audit, we will be speaking more about 3 years from the due date of filing of annual return. For the very simple reason, audit is a normal conduct. It's a checking. It is not there to detect evasion. It is basically to see. And it is, if you look into the audit manuals which have been published in the past by the department, they will say that it is also to educate the assessee about the non-compliances or the issues or the levies which he is not aware. So it is also an educational exercise between the department and the assessee. So when we say audit, unless there is a grave evasion which is unearthed during the audit, but unfortunately, when you look into the show cause notices which are issued under section 74, department, rarely uses 73. Sorry. Department rarely, I don't know, somebody just unmuted. I thought he wanted to speak something. Department rarely uses 73. It is fond of using 74. And if you look into most of the show cause notices, you will find that they will be saying, had this audit not been undertaken, the amount would have been evaded by the taxpayer. When I'm saying amount, it can be the outward or it can also be the ITC availment. Now, that's a very simple, plain line which you will find in most of the show cause notices. Now, my dear friends, it is not the case so. That is one allegation which is actually a pure statement and not a substantial allegation on the notice. So that is something to do with 73, 74. When we will discuss that particular topic sometime, we'll deliberate more on that. When I'm saying completed within the period, so the only point which I was trying to make was 3 years and 5 years, which you have to keep in mind. And within that period, now this is something which is good in GST vis-a-vis excise and service tax. The order has to be passed within this period. Unlike the earlier era where the show cause notice was merely to be issued. Now, friends, we have a timeline till which the order has to be passed. But the statute was also aware of the fact, the legislature was aware of the fact that this particular audit can also not go on for years and years. So even if they have time, still they have to complete this audit within a timeline. So 65(4) provided that this audit has to conclude within a period of 3 months from the date of commencement of audit. Now, please note the definition of commencement and of audit, which has been provided in the explanation. It means the date on which the record or other document called by the tax authorities are made available by the registered person or the actual institution of the audit at the place of business. Please note that when you say date on which the records as called by the tax authorities are made available by the registered person will mean the first instance, mean the first notice which list out all the requisites which are being looked or which are being called upon by the tax authorities from that particular registered person. It will not mean the subsequent letters of queries or further information. So once you have provided all the requirements which are listed in the first notice, and therefore, my dear friends, you should be quick in providing those ready documents. If you look into the first notice, it will be mostly talking about you. Many of my friends have already, many of you would have already got some or the other audit done. What does the first notice from the department would list out? It would list out, I would, as we know, around 40 items. But if you look into those items, those are mainly your sale register, purchase register, the details of your financials, or for that matter, tax audit report, cost audit reports, registration details, a profile. All these are very readily available kind of a documentation with the SSC, and with the kind of softwares we have, all the information which is filed on GST portal. Now, this is also a recommendation. Please do not start preparing the file details which are already there on the GST portal using Excel. You have ready softwares that will save you a lot of hassles and time. Quickly download the ready informations and just supply it to the officer. Many of the, I would say, professionals, they are reluctant to provide those details also. My dear friend, anything which has gone onto the portal of the department is already available with the department. Don't bother about it. Just give it. So whatever is there on the portal of the department, whatever is your financials, whatever is your tax audit reports, there may be one, two, many errors into that. But please understand the fact that you can't undo the thing which has already been filed onto the portals. And therefore, you should not be also reluctant to submit these information to the GST auditor. Please give it in the first instance so that your time limit for 65(4) commences. And that is the date when within 3 months, whatever information or whatever conduct has to be done, it has to be completed by the officer. Now, can this be extended? Yes, friends, this can be extended where the commissioner is satisfied that audit cannot be completed within 3 months for reason recorded in writing. So it will not only be an opinion of the commissioner or the tax officer, it will be for a reason which is recorded in writing on the file. So this is also something which he has to go a step ahead, recording the reason which will have to say what is the reason. Is it on the part of the department or on the part of the assessee? And this cannot exceed another more than a period of another 6 months. So it is not that you can extend it by a year. So 3 plus 6, maximum 9 months the audit has to conclude. But please be very, very sensitive that the first information, whenever you are submitting, you are taking proper acknowledgements of that. Preferably send it through emails. That is something which you have to take care of. Fifth, during the course of the officer, what can the officer do? The officer may require the registered person to afford him the necessary facility to verify the books of accounts or other documents. What are these other documents or books of accounts? We'll just see into a minute. To furnish such information as he may require. Now, my dear friends, this is a very wide kind of a power which has been given. But yes, it has to work within the limits. It has to work within the scope given under the other sections, which I'm just going to talk about. Now, point number 6, subsection 6, I would say, of 65. On conclusion of the audit, the proper officer shall within 30 days inform the registered person whose records are audited about the findings, his rights and obligation, and reason of such finding. So 3 months plus 6 months and another 30 days given to the officer to communicate the findings of the audit to the person. Now, when we say communicate, it is not the final audit report, it is the audit query memo, which has to be given after the conduct of the audit. Once an audit memo is given, fresh audit proceedings cannot start. It will be only confined to the communication or the interaction between the department and the SSC on those points only. Now, after that, either department agrees to them, which is I would say 50% chance. And most of the times, what is being done, either the assessee pays or the assessee is served with a show cause notice as why such amount should not be recovered from the assessee. Now, there is also section 71, which allows the officer to have the access of the premises. Now, this is one very, I would say, one section which empowers the officer with great powers. What can he do? The person, the proper officer can visit the premises of the registered person. Now, please appreciate one thing. Can he only visit the registered premises in case of audit? Yes. But in case when we are talking about inspection, scrutiny, verifications, the answer may be no, it can be any place. So even though section 71 says to any place of business of a registered person, for the audit purpose, since it can be only undertaken as I spoke in the first instance of a registered person, the access can be made only to a registered premises. To do what? The proper officer will visit to inspect the books of accounts, documents, computer programs, computer software, and such other things. Now, when you say such other things, again, the scope is very wide. He can, inspect the stock. He can inspect the plant and machinery. He can inspect whatever assets have been procured, of which ITC has been taken. All these things he can do for the purpose of carrying out his audit. Now, the person in charge, the assessee, will also have some duty to make available these things to the officer. What are those things? Records which are maintained. Now, mark the second point, friends. Trial balance or equivalent. Now, trial balance is not one of the documents which are appearing in the records which are required to be maintained under the GST statute. Section 35, read with Rule 56. Trial balance is not appearing, but when you look into this section where the officer has been empowered to visit our premises, the duty casted on the taxpayer includes presenting for the inspection the trial balance or the equivalent to the officer. So indirectly, this trial balance has crept in as one of the documents which can be required for the purpose of audit. Why is it very important? I'll take it up in issues because trial balance is one of the biggest issues in many of the cases between the tax officers, and more particularly in Karnataka. We have seen that the auditors are starting the audit only with the trial balance. I'll come to that issue a bit later. Statements of financial accounts duly audited wherever required, cost audit, income tax audit report, other relevant documents. Now, the duty also include that you have to supply these documents not exceeding 15 days from when it is demanded, or the further period as may be allowed by the officer or the audit team. I've already spoken that usually the officers will look at or will be lenient in terms of giving these timelines, but usually it ranges between 1.5 months to 3 months. Now, what are the documents? So every one of you, I'll not reiterate the set of documents required under section 35 with rule 56. You have entire list: production and manufacture records, stock records, inward outward supply records, ITC records, output tax records. Now, all of these records have to do something with the other in terms of GST statute. But can the officer or should the officer limit himself to these records only? That's a very, very important question, and for which we need to look into the definition of audit, which has been provided in section 2, subsection 13 of the CGST Act 2017. Now, what is GST? What is an audit under GST? It has been defined. Audit means examination of. So one need to examine what? Examination of records, returns, and other documents maintained and furnished by the registered person under this act or rules made thereunder or under any other law for the time being in force. Now, this is very important. So the officer can call for the documents which are prescribed under 35 read with Rule 56, can also look into documents which are supposed to be maintained under any other law for the timing in force. But apart from that, he cannot require the assessee to manufacture a particular record. So if the assessee is under Factories Act, he can produce the register of workers' wages as may be required, ESI, PF records, or for that matter, any other record which is being maintained under any other law. Why does it become important, sir? I'll give you a very simple example. When we look into manufacturing units, in one of the units, what has been seen is that unit was manufacturing metal parts. It was working, it was having a GP of 70, I would say 27% for the very first 9 months of the year. Now, what this gentleman did was, in order to bring down the GP, he purchased a lot of goods in the last 3 months and showed a lot of consumption so that the GP is brought down. My friends, these days are gone. I can tell you that the consumption pattern of the raw material, which is for the 9 months vis-a-vis the later 3 months, if it is having so huge a variation, it will not be, the assessee will not be able to substantiate that before any authority. And I think other records, when I say other records, how will they say? The officer can call for the electricity bill and the record of the wages to understand what is the amount of manufacturing activity which has happened, in the first 9 months and the last 3 months. Correlating it with the other documents, a very good case can be made out by the department against the assessee on this ground alone. So in income tax, one may be bothered about on the overall GP ratio of the assessee. From the GST perspective, even a quarterly, monthly, all these variances will definitely matter. And I am very, very hopeful that if I speak about state authorities, they don't look much into it, but when the persons who are acquainted with the excise audits, the central officers, they are very fond of looking into these kinds of tests. Now, what is when the officer is examining the records, he is to verify. Now, only 4 things are required to be verified under the statute, because these are the only 4 things required on the part of the assessee: correctness of the turnover declared, correctness of the taxes paid, refunds claimed, and input tax credit availed. So these 4 aspects the officer will verify, and he will also, apart from that, he will look into the compliances with the provisions of this act and rules made thereunder. And finally, he will assess what is the total overall compliance level of that particular assessee. Now, some questions which comes to everybody's mind. What is the jurisdiction of a GST auditor? Now, this is something very, very important. I am registered in Karnataka. I have a office in Bangalore. I have an office in Hubli. I have an office again, which is into a distant part of Karnataka. Now, these 3 offices we are having under 2 different audit commissionerate. Now, when I say different audit commissionerate, the Hubli might have a different audit commissionerate than Bangalore. Bangalore, I have the main, my principal place of business. What is a principal place of business? Every one of you are aware. It is the principal place of business as declared in the registration certificate. So, which commissioner has the power to conduct the audit? principal place or any other place also. In my humble opinion, it will be the principal place of business, the commissionerate having the jurisdiction over such particular place, which can conduct the audit, not the other one. Unlike in case of enforcement proceeding or anti-evasion proceeding, the respective commissionerate having the jurisdiction over the respective premises can conduct the proceedings in that particular premises. So please understand the difference between two of it. While the audit is guided in terms of jurisdiction qua assessee, GST registered person, in terms of anti-evasion or enforcement proceedings, it will be qua premises. So that is one difference which might be substantial in some of the cases, otherwise not in most of the cases. When you have a single entity within a state. Audit versus enforcement. Can parallel proceedings happen? Now, in this particular question, Suresh Kumar PP versus Deputy Director, DGGI, the SLP was dismissed against the order of the Honorable High Court, and it was wherein it was held that audit and investigation proceedings may be continued simultaneously. But since it was not a speaking order from the Honorable Supreme Court, the order simply was of 3 lines, where the SLP was dismissed. We cannot also call it a law of the land. But yes, my dear friends, in the past also it has been seen that audit and anti-evasion, since their perspectives are different, the proceedings can happen simultaneously. Can audit be done for unregistered premises? I have already answered that. Can GST auditor call for information relating to other GSTN? Meaning thereby, you have one company which is registered in Delhi, Karnataka, Maharashtra. My audit notice is for Karnataka GSTN. Can my learned officer tell me, okay, I want to see how you have done this particular thing into another GSTN. So if you recorded the wastage, I want to see the wastage of another unit. No, sir. He cannot call for the records of other GST registered premises, even of the same assessee. It is under the same GSTN. Whatever has been recorded, whatever has been registered, he can audit that. Audit is not anti-evasion or enforcement. Enforcement again has its own jurisdiction, except DGGI, which everybody is still trying to decipher that it has a all India jurisdiction. So can it really survive? We'll have to wait, because canon in customs also took some time. And I think DGGI jurisdiction is an enigma right now for everyone, that this is the body having absolute powers in GST without jurisdiction across the pan India. Last, whether GST auditor can call for confirmations from the third parties. Now, this is very, very important a question. Even enforcements and anti-evasion, we find that these authorities, they can issue summons. They are calling information now. Section 151 has also been amended, as you're aware, and is been effected from 1st of January 2022. Friends, this particular power is not seen in audit. Audit is not again equated with an enforcement or inquiry. Audit is basically, again, I repeat, it has a very limited definition within section 2, subsection 13 of the CGST Act, whereby the officer can call. I'll just show you again the definition on the screen. Examination of records, returns, and other documents to verify. Now, please understand in this particular aspect that he will only examine your records and documents. He is not conducting an inquiry. So if an officer, an audit officer, start verifying or calling information under section 70 from third party, he is breaching the very definition of audit which has been provided in section 2 subsection 13. Now, what is the audit process? Friends, audit process is not something new. You all are aware. It has been done in past also. First of all, the computer system based on the risk assessment will select the cases for the audit out of, so it is turnover wise. It is also sector wise. It is also taking into account the variance of ITC being used for the purpose of output payments. All these criterias, different criterias, the cases are selected by the system. Now these selected assessees, the officer will first of all pass an order to conduct the audit. Once the order is passed, it is allocated to a particular team. The team will then issue a notice informing the assessee of the proposed audit and will also list out all the requisite documents which are required for the purpose of audit. It will also list out the name of the team members, the proposed dates of audit to be conducted, the time within which those documents have to be submitted, and last but not the least, it will also lay down the commissionerate under which that particular team works or is working under which commissionerate. So these particular points will all be there on that particular notice. If the notice is silent about any of these issues, then my dear friend, the notice does not suffice the very purpose for which it is being issued. One has a right to write back to the officer requiring the remaining information which is missing in that particular notice. Once you have collated and given the information to the officer, as I've said, under subsection 4, the audit time will commence. And the first thing which officers do is desk review. They will take your records, they will look into your financial statements in their own office. They will look into the returns being filed, what taxes has been paid, not paid, what are the items on which taxes has not been paid. Examining the entire scenario, they will take down certain basic points where they need to focus. They will present that particular report for the approval of their senior officer. Senior officer either approves or will add 2 or 3 more points, maybe more, in the focus areas of that particular team. Now, once they have identified, they will now conduct the audit. When they are conducting the audit, they will have to answer all those specified points which they have identified during desk review. They will have to complete their file in terms of answering those points, plus they will also have to do the normal or the procedural uh, performa which has been given to them by the department, wherein basic information and certain correlated informations are being filled. Now, once they have conducted the audit, they will go back to their office, present their entire report to their officers. While in state tax, the practices are varied. Maharashtra, Delhi, Karnataka, the state officers follow a different, uh, process in terms of reviews by their seniors. In center, usually they present this particular report in what they called a MCM. So before MCM, this will be presented to a senior officer. That senior officer will approve that yes, now the file is ready to be presented to an MCM. And in the MCM, there will be teams, audit teams, plus their senior officials who will all together, where turn by turn, the teams will present their audit points under different audits. And either those paragraphs will be approved by MCM or they will be rejected or they will be kept for more deliberation. We have seen very rarely it is, the points are kept for further deliberations. But yes, whenever points are being kept for further deliberations, those points usually turn out to be the landmark points either side on the SSC or the department. And last but not the least, as I've said earlier, within 30 days of the completion of the audit, they will have to uh, present the audit memo with the audit queries. Either those audit queries will be accepted or paid or dropped by the department. So if there is still some audit point which is unresolved, finally it will be, I would say, concluded in form of issuance of a show cause notice to the SSC. Show cause notice, in my humble opinion, it is not the end, it is the beginning of any dispute with the department. Show cause notice is a very, very important document. All of my friends are aware of the very landmark judgment of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Brindavan Beverages, which has just been reiterated in two of the decisions, one in the Honorable Gujarat High Court and the other one in PNH, Punjab and Haryana High Court. My friends, show cause notice is the foundation of the proceedings. Anything which is not there in the show cause notice cannot be confirmed by any of the adjudicating authorities in the proceedings or at a subsequent stage. In one of the cases, we have found, rather in many of the cases it is seen, but very recently in one of the cases, the commissioner appeal, the learned commissioner appeal, he traveled beyond what was alleged in the show cause notice and took up a new point. Now, the learned commissioner appeal cannot act in a adjudicating capacity. He is into a position where he will only look into the matters. If he want to go beyond that, then he will have to again get a show cause notice issued to the SSC and adjudicate it separately. Now, having shared the entire process powers, the certain important points, let me come to the issues which are right now being debated between many of the SSCs and the audit teams. What are the possible issues in audit? As I said in the beginning, no limit. Still, I would discuss or lay down some of the possible issues in terms of supplies, whether these items form supply or not, penalties, interest charged from customer, dividends, forfeited amounts, cross charge, invoice without proof of supply. Can these be treated as supply? Can tax be levied on that? A lot of debates are going on across the country on these issues in supply. Classification, my dear friends, I can tell you classification will be the second biggest after ITC, in my humble opinion. It will be the second biggest number of cases in the country. Why I'm saying so? The combined supplies, which is the mixed supply vis-a-vis the composite supply, is one of the biggest debates going in many cases. You are supplying, let me take a very simple example. You are supplying sweet meat in a restaurant. So you're running a restaurant, you're also supplying sweet meat within the same premises to the customer. Let me remind you of the very, very nicely written AAR in the case of Kundan Mishtan Bhandar, which has traveled to triple AR. Now, very finally, the authority, though I'm not a fan of advanced rulings because it is limited to a particular SSC, and also we have found that in many of the cases it is pro revenue. Still, you will find some of the very well written with proper reasoning, some of the ARs which we take it as a part of learning. When this Kundan Mishtan Bhandar is also one of them. That within the same premises, you have to look into the category of the supply and not the very fact that the person is uh, uh, running a restaurant. Sorry, is running a restaurant, and therefore anything and everything which is supplied from that place will fall within the purview of the restaurant supply only. So, what about the scrap or the waste coming out from that particular restaurant? Will it be classified under restaurant services? No, my dear friend, it will not be. Similarly, the sweetmeats which are supplied as off the shelf supply will also not fall within the ambit of restaurant services. So look into the classification debate. Looking into this was a smaller part. Now let me take you to the other side. In cases of solar power plant, one of the major debates where Karnataka has been a co-leader in terms of AARs. Fermi Solar, if I'm not wrong, is again from Karnataka. Giriraj, a number of decisions are there. But then the sole point is whether it is a immovable property or not. That was one question which was being examined in solar power plant things. Classification was the biggest debate. Is it a movable property supply? Is it a immovable property supply? Or is it a supply which need to be bifurcated? Now, this is also one of the questions which department is raising. In one of the cases, the department contested, sir, you have paid taxes on 80% of supply and 20% on these services, while 80% was covered under 5%, 20% was covered under 18%. My dear sir, in this particular case, department has tried to challenge the very proportion in which a supply between goods and services was made by a SSC. Can it do so? In my humble opinion, no. And for this, you have in the VAT era, there was one very landmark judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court. It was on the printing ink, printing paper. It was a case of printing industry. Let me get back to you when I get the name of that particular case. Maybe Badriji can help me with that. So the proportion between the buyer and the supplier cannot be challenged by the department. If there is a privity, maybe I am making services at a lower price and goods at a profitable way, or maybe I'm supplying you with two goods where I am making profit in one and I'm not making profit in other. That is not the problem. Department is not here to see whether I'm making profits or not. What it is to see whether the classification is correct, whether the price which has the transaction price, have I charged tax on that particular amount or not? And if it is falling within the purview of 15(4), section 15 subsection 4, then yes, uh, the department has got the power to see whether the valuation rules have been properly applied by the taxpayer or not. So combined supplies, the value of different supplies, 1+1 offer, works contract, NGOs, all of them are the contagious issue in classification. If I speak about NGO, in one of the cases, the debate was the amount donated by a person. Now, I'll take a very simple example of CRY. CRY is Child Relief and You. So I'm just giving you an example so that you're able to correlate yourself very quickly on the aspect which I'm talking about. Now, CRY calls you to donate funds for children, and you have donated 1 lakh for the upbringing and education of some of the children. You don't know the number, don't know the child on which it is being spent, but out of your own goodwill, as a philanthropic work, you have donated 1 lakh rupees. Now, my dear friend, is it a donation? Everybody of us will say yes, sir. Now, I'm putting a bit of a complication into this. You have been called by CRY to ask for donation, whereby you have been told that every child, every year, for education and upbringing needs to be, the CRY needs around 10,000 rupees. So CRY said, can you fund some of the children? You were very kind, and as a philanthropic work, again, you have donated for 10 children. Now, again, you don't know which 10 children, but then you donated 10 lakh rupees and 1 lakh rupees for 10 children. Now, my dear friend, in this particular case, also it is a donation. Every one of us will agree. I'm now complicating it further by saying CRY called you and asked you, sir, can you donate for 10 children? You said, sir, how would I know whether you've applied those that money for those children or not? CRY said, sir, I'll give you the name today, and I will also give you a progress report after 10 months or 1 year or 6 months, whatever. You said, okay, fine. So you now know which 10 children are being feeded, are being brought up, are being nurtured with your money. Is it a supply? No, my dear sir, it is still not a supply, because the very fact that whether you are contributing to a cause or you are the very cause of that particular supply, that is the basic difference. In this particular case, if you would have said no, CRY would have approached to someone else to get those particular children which the entity has or society has selected to be nurtured. They are not dependent on you. You have just joined the bandwagon, that cause. You are not the cause of that particular supply, and therefore this will fall within the ambit of donation. So NGOs is again one of the entities where supply is often, or classification is often, challenged by the department. Valuation, related party transaction, employee supplies, reimbursements, valuation plays a very, very important role. Whenever you see these three words, alag se, you take out these three words, you take out all the transactions which are falling within these three, ambit of these three categories. Look at their valuations very, very carefully. Now, I'll give you a very simple example. Many of the directors are showing the use of vehicle in their perquisites. So there is a company which is owning a fleet of Mercedes, 10 Mercedes, and there are 5 directors and some key managerial person who are using those particular vehicle. Now, those particular directors are showing the use of the vehicle in their income tax filing as perquisite, and you all know that that is a meager amount which they add to their perquisite. Let us, if I'm not wrong, forgive me because I'm not an income tax practitioner. I'm not filing returns per se. So that amount, let me presume it as 5,000 per month. Now, for the use of Mercedes, you have declared that you are using a vehicle both for your personal and for official use, meaning thereby the vehicle belongs to the company and the company is providing the vehicle for personal use of the director. How is it not a supply in the hands of the company? These questions have not yet been raised by the department. It is right now under the surface, it is being discussed. Please look into them very, very carefully because these are related party transaction, employee supplies, and will definitely be challenged in the coming days with the by the department. Reimbursements, a very fondly used words, more particularly in industries like CHA. When you talk about CHA, they are one of the sectors which has huge reimbursements from their clients, from their SSC. And these particular SSCs, they sort of pay a lot of amounts in terms of airport charges, in detention charges, custom duties, warehousing charges. All of them, will they form part of reimbursement? I'll not go into the concept, but yes, when you're doing it for a CHA, if you ask me, if I have got 10 CHA cases done, there will be only 3 CHA who have got very good records, but 7 will be definitely struggling with their records in terms of the quality of documents to prove that it is a reimbursement. I'll close the reimbursement issue with one line. Reimbursement only happens when there is a direct privity of supply between the supplier and your client, and you are merely a conduit to make a payment. If the invoices are in your name, it might not. I'm not saying absolutely, because I'm also sensitive of the honorable Supreme Court decision where even the sharing of costs have been allowed as non-taxable under service tax, which will definitely apply in the present era also. So most of the reimbursement, just be aware that it should be a direct privity between the supplier and your client, and you are just merely a conduit. Invoices should be in his name and not your name. But I'm not making it an absolute condition, looking into the wideness of this particular indirect tax. Input tax credit, again, most sensitive. I don't think there had been any budget where government has not put conditions and conditions on input tax credit. When GST was introduced, it was introduced with two basic reasons. Number one, multiplicity of taxes will go. Agreed, sir. Done. Thankful to government that GST has been brought in and multiplicity of the taxes have gone. Second, ITC, seamless flow of ITC. Can we say it is a seamless flow of ITC today? Looking into section 16, subsection 2, where again 2AA, 2BA, government is increasing conditions and conditions. And this budget, section 38, I think once you have read through it, it will become possibly every SSC will be a defaulter in the coming days. For the very simple reason, now you are not dependent on your conduct. You are dependent on the conduct of your supplier also. Read section 38, very interesting read for this time. But yes, input tax credit, Mangalore Chemicals, I'm reminded of Honorable Supreme Court where it has been said, there are conditions and conditions. Some of the conditions are procedural, some are substantial. It is only the case of substantial conditions default where the ITC should be disallowed to the taxpayer. However, when the very conditions, every condition is being brought in, being embedded in this statute, I'm afraid how will you define what is procedural and what is substantial? Because from the government perspective, if the supplier has not uploaded his invoice, that is also a substantial condition for me as a buyer to take credit. In my humble opinion, that is not the case. A bona fide buyer still cannot be. The buyers of 16.2 AA, the buyers of 16.2 BA will definitely be challenged in the courts. Sir, how can you penalize me for the conduct of other when I do not have a control over the conduct of the other, when the government has granted the registration to the other person, not me? So when somebody is not under my control, how can I be penalized when I'm in a bona fide position? Or you do one thing, you directly collect the taxes, stop the process of ITC, and let's go back to the days when there was first stage tax in sale tax and everybody was just working on forms once the first tax has been paid to the government. So ITC, that was the condition part. But yes, very commonly we find the challenge in terms of number one, Rule 37. Rule 37, every one of you are aware that 180 days, within 180 days, if you are not making payment of both the value and the tax to your supplier, to your vendor, then you are called in to reverse the credit to the proportion of which you have not paid the amount and tax to your supplier. So if it was 118 rupees and you have only paid 59, you need to reverse 9 rupees of your ITC to comply with Rule 37. But unfortunately, when you look into Rule 37 still talks about reversal via GSTR 2. Now, that was prior to the amendment when GSTR 2 and 3 were the forms looked by the government that they will still be coming out. But with this budget, the hope has been put to an end. The abeyance has ended. The distant dream of 2 and 3 coming into play has ended. So 2 is no longer coming to be the form for ITC availment, reversal, acceptance, etc. So Rule 37, if someone is finding it into a position where he has not reversed, he may still tell the officer, sir, this particular rule talks about me reversing the credit when it is GSTR 2, when it will be affected, I'll reverse it in that. However, still GSTR 2 is not in place, and therefore this particular vacuum, this particular void, this particular reversal cannot be burdened on me. I am not supposed to pay interest in absence of a procedure which is not still live. So that particular plea can still, in my humble opinion, should be taken.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲ ನಿನ್ನ ತೋರಿಸಿದ್ದೀವಿ.
That particular plea, at least, when someone speaks in between, you are made aware that the session is still live. Otherwise, sometimes you are lost whether you're speaking blindly and has the session also got interrupted and you are not aware. So thank you for making me aware on this.
That's a good one, G.
Sir, so coming back on the ITC, so I was speaking on Rule 37. So my dear friend, Rule 37, don't pay interest. Let's fight it out for once with the officers that in absence of GSTR2, don't burden us with the interest part. Again, in terms of 42 and 43 reversals, many of the assessees have forgot to reverse the credit. My dear friends, I am very, very particularly talking about one transaction, which I am very sure that most of the assessees have not reversed. Which is that, sir? That is the reversal on account of sale and purchase of securities. Friends, whenever you see a enterprise balance sheet, you will find that there is a lot of investments which have been done. Now, those particular investments, the funds are usually parked by that large entity and in form of mutual funds, in form of shares, in form of some government securities. If they are trading or investing in such securities or mutual funds or whatever, they are supposed to reverse their ITC on the very count that securities are included within 17.3 as exempt supply. So to that particular piece, you need to make reversals under 42 and 43. That is very, I would say that is one of the examples where people miss. 42 and 43, when somebody speak about, they always relate it to, okay, I'm making an exempt supply directly or not. While 42 and 43 might have implications which travel beyond your simply outward supplies. So please look into it. ITC not availed. I'll speak on one point in a while. ITC not availed vis-a-vis unclaimed ITC. Very, very interesting topic which comes up in most of the audits. Time and place of supply, contractors, completion important, sent on samples. Issues in time and place of supply. Fortunately, we have seen that in audit, the department is right now not focusing on the time and place of supply issues. More particularly, place of supply IGST versus CGST. This is something which has not come up very frequently in audit cases. I think hardly 1 or 2 issues I've seen in past 50 cases or so. So when audits are being conducted, department is not very finely looking into time and place, for the very simple reason the whole focus of the officers is primarily on supply, classification and ITC, and these are the three major issues which you will be finding in most of the coming SCNs. Other compliances, I think minor issues always come up. Even issues like you are not placing proper board in front of your premises, those issues are there. Now, let me speak on some important issues on revenue reconciliation. Trial balance. Karnataka officers very particular about trial balance. They call in trial balance. Without trial balance, how can I conduct the audit of a particular GSTN? My dear friends, this is a big question. Many of the multinationals in the inception itself, though I am one person who is of the view that every person should have a distinct GSTN. Every distinct person should have a distinct trial balance. So, in my humble view, trial balance is mandatory in terms of maintaining, because without trial balance, how can you tell someone that you have a proper record of all your transactions? There may be issues, there may be problems. In most of the companies, when they are making trial balance, they are making it unit wise. So I have 5 manufacturing units, 3 installation units, I'll make unit wise. There are companies which make circle wise, in which they might combine two states together. So there are companies which make zone wise. It is not a choice after GSTN. You are not working in an international scenario in terms of GST. What the GST law requires is the records of a particular person, and I have made it very, very clearly that under section 71, the calling of a trial balance has become a right and a duty on the part of the assessee. Right of the officer, duty of the assessee. What if trial balance is not there? Sir, if trial balance is not there, that cannot become a reason of raising a demand. Trial balance is a document. In absence of it, there may be transactions which the officer has a reason to believe, and he may go for a best judgment assessment, and the entire burden will then be transferred to the assessee to prove otherwise. Because when you're not supplying a document, you are also giving him a reason to evoke best judgment assessment. But best judgment assessment will not mean that it will be a case which is easily possible in the present scenario. In case of absence of trial balance, he may raise an issue in the show cause notice. If you read 155, I'll give you one example. I hope every one of you are aware of section 155. What does 155 says? It casts the burden of proving the right ITC on the assessee. Now, my dear friend, in this particular case, the ITC, if you're not presenting a trial balance, whether the asset is within the purview of that GST or not, how will one officer, how can he substantiate? I think these particular answers we have, if we don't have a trial balance, we have to substantiate in some way or the other. I cannot simply run away by saying that, see, I don't have a trial balance, I will only produce output input records, and from this only you will have to make out a case for me or against me. Trial balance, even though it is not mandatory in terms of the records being maintained, but it is mandatory to be presented under section 71 subsection 2. I also understand that many of the experts might not agree on this particular position, but my dear friends, this is one debate which will go on till it reaches some finality in the court of law. Second, remember, not all revenues are taxable supply and not all taxable supplies are revenue. For example, creditors written off, interest income, they are not a taxable supply. Many times it is being asked, sir, I'm writing off my creditor, do I need to pay GST? No, sir, you don't need to pay GST. Forfeiture amount, my humble opinion, no GST. Netted amounts, shared expenses, collection from employees. Now, all of them are taxable supplies, but they are usually netted from the expenses. Employees has always been a sensitive issue. If you are acting into a capacity of a supplier, then you are a supplier, otherwise not. If you are facilitating a supply to the employee, you are not a supplier, you are not exigible to GST. Income not appearing in financial, rental income in case of a proprietor, these are outside the financial, but still they are taxable supplies. Other points of focus, which we have find department struggling with the assesses on these parts, unbilled revenue. So there was one assessee where he had paid taxes on 12 crore rupees of his works contract in a particular month, but in the month of April he also had a right back of unbilled revenue of last year. Now the officer was not able to comprehend the unbilled revenue when he is written back for the last year in the month of April and was wanting to tax that amount also in the previous year. They cannot tax the unbilled revenue and billed revenue twice in the hands of the person. The only point in case of unbilled revenue can be the time of supply, which I already told you right now, that is not the focus of the audit teams. Permanent transfer or disposal of business assets to other branches. Many a times there will be employees which will be shifted from one branch to another. Has the ITC which is relatable to those particular assets which are moved along with employee, maybe a mobile phone, maybe a laptop, has it gone to the other branch? You have to see to that. There are companies where a clear policy of fixed asset movements are not there. This might cause a problem, and I'm telling you, this is also not very easy on the part of the auditor to find out. It is only when a specific question is raised by the auditor, these are very easy to catch. Next, unadjusted advances. Very tough in some of the cases to maintain and answer. In one of the very large corporation, let me not name it, it was very tough to first identify which customer has made which payment. So the first work they have to spend a lot of time was mapping of customers. So they cannot simply, whatever is the unidentified amount, they will not pay tax on that. They will take time to segregate. Okay, these are the matched one, these are still to be matched. And it takes 1.5 months to match up the entire debtor collection, whether it is an advance or whether it is relatable to a raised invoice. So these are challenges which you will find in large companies and not in the smaller ones. Yes, in terms of hotel and hospitality, advances play a very, very important role. Credit notes, detailing of reason. Whenever you are getting your audit done, credit notes have also come up as more particularly in FMCG sector, the department is focused on challenging the credit notes. So expired pharmaceutical company, stock of the pharmaceutical companies, end of season discounts in case of garment industry. In one of the very recent cases, the question was, so there was a company which has got some uh, promotion activity done on Flipkart, right, or Amazon, or for that matter any of the e-commerce platform. Now that particular company had reached to the OEM. Now this company was a trader which has undertaken that particular advertisement. It reached out to the OEM requesting the OEM, see, I had to run this particular campaign, and therefore my viability for the sale has become impossible. I don't have margin to run this campaign, but I have to do it in order to sell more of the product. So I'm requesting you to kindly reimburse or give me this particular amount, and this can be done by giving me discounts because the amount I'm not supposed to pay you, and therefore my cost goes down and I'm become viable. The department said, no, 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 no. You are not supposed to get the credit note from the supplier. Since you have undertaken a promotion and you're getting a reimbursement of that particular amount from the supplier, you are supposed to raise your vendor, your OEM, an invoice for this being a supply in terms of promotion undertaken for him. My dear sir, this is never the case. I'm not an advertising agency. In my humble opinion, this contention of the department will not sustain, because even though I'm telling the truth to my vendor, that does not mean that I become a supplier to my vendor. I've given him the reason why I need a further discount, but that does not mean that I have also undertaken a liability to run a particular revenue program for him. So these are kind of correlations which come up during the recent audits, which are into dilemma situations between department and the SSC. I am sure you must be sitting on much more issues than what I am. Personal balance sheet and income tax return, can it be called for audit? Yes, sir. It can be called for audit if it is a case of an audit of a particular person, because as you have seen under any other law, so these records can be called in. One of the very talked about debated point is receipt of service exports when they are received after 1 year. Now, my dear friends, all of you are aware that as per Rule 96A(1) of the CGST rule, the assessee undertakes to bring in the amount within 1 year or the extended time period allowed by RBI in convertible foreign exchange. And if he fails to do, then the department requires him to pay the interest amount from the date of invoice till the date of receipt of that particular amount. Some of the audit teams are also taking the position, no, it will be only the differential. So from the period of 1 year till you receive the payment, different positions are being seen from different audit teams. In my humble opinion, my dear friends, you don't need to pay interest, sorry, you always have to pay the revenue. In this particular case, either it is an export or it is not. It is not something that it was not an export till yesterday and it became an export today. If the department agrees to the proposition that it is an export, then in that particular case, my dear friend, there is no outward tax which I need to pay. If there is no output tax which I need to pay, there is no interest which I need to pay. Cross charge. Let me looking into the paucity of time, since I'm left with 15 minutes, for which I'll also take 10 minutes question from everyone. Let me refrain myself from speaking on cross charge. I'm aware that Bangalore has always been a 4-leader again on this particular topic, and members are much aware on this particular topic. But my dear friends, let me also sensitize everyone that 3 terms have to be used very sensitively. Number 1, cross charge. Number 2, ISD. And number 3, supply. Does supply exist between branches? Yes, sir. Supply do exist between branches. ISD, cross charge, 3 terms, 3 different categories of transaction, 3 different treatments. Be very clear. And when you speak about cross charge, Columbia Asia might be a good learning judgment decision. But also please be aware that in most of the cases, 95% cases, you have the rescue in terms of valuation under Rule 28 second proviso, where the invoice value becomes the transaction value for such kinds of transaction. ITC shown as netted in 3B. Now, this is one issue which has come up in most of the audits. What error assessors have done, I was to take 100 rupees of credit. I also had to reverse 20 rupees of credit for last month, which was wrongly taken or whatever. So my accountant took 80 rupees of net credit. Will this be allowed to me? Audit team says, no, sir, you were supposed to take 100, show 20 as reversal. My dear sir, at that particular time, I was under the impression that GST 3 will come, and 3B is only a stopgap arrangement to me to pay the taxes. With Bharti Airtel decision, Honorable Supreme Court has made it very clear that you were aware of your books of accounts and you were supposed to self-assess your taxes and pay the same in a self-assessment mode. So while the entire burden of paying the taxes is on the assessee, I think we can distinguish the decision of Honorable Supreme Court in case of Bharti Airtel to the extent that the reflection of that particular amounts correctly in 3B, since it was not possible and I was under the impression it is a stopgap arrangement, my net result would have remained same had 3 was filled in a proper manner at a later point of time. So the nettings should have been allowed to the assessee. If department is challenging it, please fight it out. It was a new act. Nettings, whether it is to be done, not done. 3B, was it a stopgap arrangement or was it the full stop for the assessee? I'm not sure. Let's keep it for courts to decide. ITC is charged to expense accounts, including that of fixed assets. Some errors have been done, department trying to disallow it. My humble submission on this will be, one can reverse the same in his books of accounts today also. So if inadvertently someone has included the ITC of an expense as expense in income tax and has also taken ITC in GST, the amount can be reversed in income tax to the extent of ITC on which expense has been claimed under income tax. Friends, ineligible versus unclaimed ITC. Very interesting. In one of the audit cases, what has happened is the assessee had a total ITC claim of 100 rupees, while in his books he had 110 line. Unfortunately, in the 100 rupees what he has claimed, there was 5 rupees of ineligible credit. Now he requested the audit team, sir, the 5 rupees which is there as ineligible, I have 10 rupees which I have not claimed. So I would place these 10 rupees in against the 5 rupees which you are proposing to reverse. My dear sir, again, this is something which needs to be challenged. This need to be fought for the very reason, had GSTR 2 was in place, I would have got a chance to take what are the ITC which I'm accepting and what am I rejecting. There was a possibility that I might not have missed my 10 rupees. So we cannot be unreasonable on both counts to the SSC, that one side he has unclaimed credits and on the other side he has ineligible ITC. So we will take ineligible ITC. We will not look at unclaimed credits, which is legitimately available with him. I think most of the SSCs would rectify this, because ITC register does not go as part of 3B. But there are still some whom we have found that they get stuck. So other issues I've already discussed while I was speaking on that broader slide. One topic which has very interestingly come up is CGST versus IGST claim of ITC. Now this is something very tough to say. It is not a case where I've not taken ITC. It is also not a case where it can be equated with a procedural error, looking into the very fact that all the three acts are different acts: CGST, SGST, IGST. Again, if you read the speech, para, I think 138 of the budget 2022, Honorable Finance Minister again referred GST2 as one nation, one tax. But when we speak to the officers and telling them that, see, this is one nation, one tax, I have inadvertently taken CNS while I had IGST on invoice. My officer will tell me, no, sir, it is not one nation, one tax. These are three different acts. You should follow three different acts in a very different and clear manner. This is three acts in one nation. There, at that particular point, the very one nation, one tax concept goes out of my mind. I am being forced to understand that this is not one nation, one tax. Yes, since the very beginning, I've been telling everyone, this is one nation, uniform tax, not one nation, one tax. So if you are stuck in such a situation, I will not say it is a very good case to fight, but still don't give up the issue without a fight. That's what I can say. Updation of addresses in the same GSTN. If you have paid the output from those GSTN and you have also taken the ITC attributable to those premises in the GSTN, sorry, the output tax and the input tax, if they are incorporated in your GSTN, that mere addition will be taken as a procedural error. If there is any other reason, that has to be seen on a case-to-case basis. Sir, also please note that you need to pay proper attention to the missing series of the invoices. So we have seen many of the assesses, there are invoices, one or two numbers which are missed on a day basis, week basis, year, quarter basis, and they don't pay attention to that. Be very, very specific. These questions, when they come up, becomes a very tough point during the audit in some of the cases. Different situations of error, willful error. Sir, if it is a willful error, all penalties, all prosecution trigger. Ignorance of law, please don't take it as a plea. Ignorance of law cannot be pleaded, but if it is a procedural error, it can be pleaded as a non-clarity being a new law. Technical error, justified if the assessee has a base, he has taken an expert opinion, he has research documents, he has some advanced ruling which are contradictory or they are colliding on a particular issue. Technical errors, assessee cannot be penalized. Negligence of an employee, tough situation for the employer. All left on to the courts what position they will take. So I think I've covered couple of issues today with all of you. I thank all the members of BCIC present today for such a patient listening. I thank all the managing committee members for inviting me for this particular session. So with these words, my dear friend, I put an end to my deliberation. I'm open for any questions. Badriji, if you're there, we can just conclude this session in 10 minutes.
Haji, very much. I'm right here. Thank you so much. It was wonderful listening to you. In fact, I like two slides in yours where you kind of arrange them in the aspect of, to say supply, then input tax, then compliance, those aspects as to what the issues are. I like that. And the last one is very interesting. The classification of errors. I should say that. Actually, G, you mentioned GST is not one nation, one tax, right? I think I'll give an example. One nation, one tax, truly in form, in fashion, in substance, everything was service tax on the indirect tax side, right?
Yes, yes.
One nation, one tax. There is one more aspect you mentioned on the treasury management as mutual funds, etc. The investments that is earned, whether that is exempt income or not. In fact, in the service tax law, also this question had come up in the Bangalore, say Karnataka, the south of India jurisdiction in quite a few places. But yes, we've been able to prevail upon the tax office in our experience to say that look, it is not an exempt activity, should not be applied. Let's see how it goes in the GST era.
So, department learns from his own mistakes and they incorporate all those into the act. So now 17.3 very specifically.
As recent as few days, Canon India ruling undone. So
Yes.
let's see what happens to that. Yes, with this, maybe we'll take some questions. Manjesh has a question. Manjesh, would you like to unmute yourself and ask, please? Manjesh, are you there? Okay, I'll read out his question. It says, need input on how to compute the term date of commencement of audit as envisaged under 65(4). GST ADT1 issued seeking for laundry list of documents or records or like internal audit report, journal vouchers, material rejection note, etc., which are highly impossible for taxpayer to provide. Date of actual institution of audit, whichever is later. So effectively 3 months timelines never gets completed unless documents, that is TB, trial balance, etc. are provided. Can you throw some light?
See, my take on this is very simple. Can you provide the documents or not? If you can provide the documents and whatever time you take to provide the documents, and after a point where you say, I can't provide this document, you can simply put it with the reason in your letter. The day you say these are the documents provided and these cannot be provided for this reason, that is the day, in my humble opinion, the date of commencement will start for the department.
Interesting. Nagavalli has a question. She's raised her hand. So would you please like to unmute yourself and ask?
Would like to know from January 2022 onwards, there is a restriction on claiming the ITC. Whatever is appearing in 2B alone, we will be able to claim. Then what about the unclaimed ITC as on December? How will we be able to claim?
Ma'am, I think even 16(2) AA at the very first instance, when you look into 16(2) AA, that is still challengeable. The wires will be challenged in the court of law. Having said so, whenever the December ITC, there can be two situations. Number one, that has not appeared till December, it is now appearing in January. So if it is appearing in January, February till September, you can easily take it because it forms part of 16(2) AA. Second situation, where you have forgot to take a credit which was appearing in 2B earlier and now you're wanting to take, you can definitely take it. But I understand your concern. Your box will be, your ITC box in your return, I've been told that becomes red. So please don't look at the colors while filing the return. Look at the true color of your credit rather than the color of the boxes. If the color of the credit is clean, don't worry about any other color.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir.
That was a nice way. Sir, एक और question है आपके लिए. I was told in the session that creditors write-off is not taxable. Similarly, what about advance received from customers prior to GST period and has been treated as income due to customer insolvency?
See, at the outset, the advance which was received prior to GST period in any case will not become taxable because the time of supply does not fall within this particular period unless there is a supply which has been made during this period. So if it is a case of no supply, but the amount received prior to this particular period, this income cannot be made exigible to tax in this era. It might be taxable in service tax era under the earlier provision, not today. Government cannot cannot charge GST saying that sorry, I forgot to charge it under service tax, let me tax it today in GST. No, that limitation, that taxability is different. Today, taxability is different. Don't pay tax on this.
Sir, an added question that is not there, but I'm adding to it.
Please, sir.
Now that now that the idea is not that it is not liable to GST, would you qualify it as not a supply and therefore ask me to reverse input tax under 42?
Sir, I am putting it independent of the compliance of 37.
Sure.
And I've already shared my view on 37, sir. You had to give me GST 2. You have not given me GST 2. How can you blame me for not reversing it?
Sure.
Read rule 37, 2 is missing.
Okay, sir. Thank you. And one more before we kind of maybe wind up. We registered with one service in GST, but later situation come to transfer some assets to associate entity. In that case, what HSN code to be used in the invoice? They are different types of assets.
Sorry, I am not able to get this question very clearly.
Okay, I'll attempt to rephrase. I think, sir, मैं answer दे देता हूँ. I think you registered as a service provider, but subsequently you're transferring some assets to an associate entity. There is no single HSN for that. You should identify you should make a list of each of the assets that you're transferring, and HSN will be separate to each of the assets. There is no one HSN for all the assets.
Agreed, sir. Agreed.
Yes, sir. There are no more. There are, yeah. Who's this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, I have two questions. See, one is this unregistered vendors on which we avail this input tax credit. There was a complaint saying that self-invoicing procedure need to be built in by us, by the assessee. Is it mandatory, and in the audit can raise any objection if it is not there or something? Self-invoicing on this URD ITC availed. There was a complaints, in the beginning of GST, they have given
Till October 2017. You are talking about 9/4.
No. Self-invoicing for claiming any of the input tax credit availed on this RCM cases, no?
Right, sir. Under section 31.
Section 31.
Right, sir.
So
what is the issue?
No. Self-invoicing is a mandatory thing, or how it will be looked into by audit? In case if it is not done or something, will they charge us? Will they bounce back on us? Okay, that is one. Second thing is all the service exports, where we are claiming GST exemptions on foreign transactions, where LUT can be supporting that. If we are providing any export of service, LUT can be also can prevent is it okay to have LUT for services? I'm asking. LUT every year we renew for exports, for goods exports. Okay, that can be applied even for that can be used for service exports also, export of services.
Yes, sir. There is one single LUT. You don't have to apply LUT every time.
Service exports also we can make use of that, no?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Not
sir.
only for material export.
No separate. I don't know. Badrinath ji might add value to this. We don't have two LUTs for the same year.
Nothing. Agree with you,
Okay.
sir. One
Okay,
single
thank you.
LUT for the full year.
Yeah, thanks.
On your first question, I would say that, see, as per law, you are supposed to raise that self-invoice. And self-invoice is the document on which the credit can be taken, not the challan. So
Exactly.
neither your debit of your ledger will help, nor your payment challan will help on the reverse charge front. That self-invoice is a document on which credit is taken. If you have not given a strong statement to the officer that I'm not maintaining, you can still maintain and show him the self-invoices, sir.
No, that's no, it is a new concept which they adopted. Earlier, service tax law only asking us to give only challans on which straight away we are allowed to take the credit.
Under service tax, challan was the document on which credit was allowed. Very
Okay,
interestingly, that was a difference.
okay, sir. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Maybe Gauravji, one last question before we kind of wind up. Ayushi has a question. Ayushi, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Good evening, sir. So my question was with regards to GSTR 2A reconciliation. So Rule 36.4 came about in October 2019. So for the earlier 2 years, 17, 18 and 18, 19, if there are some unreconciled invoices, can the department still raise any issue around it?
Department wants its cake and eat it too. When Bharti Airtel said GSTR 2 is not in place, my 2A reconciliation was not happening because I didn't have 2A properly with me. Department went to Supreme Court where they got an order from Honorable Supreme Court stating that it was on a self-assessment mechanism and 2A was only a facilitation mechanism. When it comes to the audit and something not appearing in 2A, then 2A becomes a Bible for the department. Oh, this is not appearing in 2A. We will not allow you. So I think the two positions now department has to settle that till October 2019, they will have to follow the Honorable Supreme Court order that 2A was not the document to take the credit. It was merely a facilitation. If they are not following, then they are not following the order of Honorable Supreme Court, number one. Number two, even after October 2019, there was no substantial law. The wires of 36.4 is right now under challenge in 5 high courts, in my humble knowledge. Please wait for it, Ayushi ji. You will soon find that even 36.4 might be struck down by the honorable courts. It is only after the section 16(2) AA, whereafter the form GSTR 2A or 2B, in my humble opinion, has got life. Otherwise, it was merely a facilitation till now.
And so one last question for 16(2) AA is, it says, the details which have been uploaded by the supplier. So can we interpret that in case of imports and RCM, since those details don't appear, are not uploaded by the supplier? So can we interpret that it will not be, this clause will not be applicable for imports and RCMs?
You don't need to interpret that for the very simple reason because it only speaks about the invoices to be uploaded under section 37 subsection 1, and these documents are not covered under 37 subsection 1 as detailed from the outward supplier. So
Okay.
Take credit whenever you want.
Okay, sir. Understood. Thank you so much.
Sir, that I'm sure was a very welcome clarification to say that the credit aspect that you just mentioned towards the end of it, in the sense for anything which is not there in 2A, don't worry, till such time 16(2) AA becomes effective, that condition doesn't apply. I'm sure that's a very welcome clarification. Sir, maybe I don't see any more questions. So with that, we'll kind of wind up. Sir, once again, Gauraji, very, very big thank you to actually have spent time. Though it's a back-to-back one, you had one before this and you have one more, so I'll not take more of your time. We'll let you go to the next one. Thank you so much. I'm sure each one of our members have enjoyed interacting with you. I'll get in touch with you maybe for another session sometime soon. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.